General Hospital will reveal interesting facts on Wednesday, March 12, 2025. First, the past seemed to come alive again as Lucky and Liz found themselves drawn back into each other's orbit. Their connection, once so strong, had been tested by time and distance, yet fate had a way of pulling them together once more. When Lucky risked everything to rescue Liz from Cyrus, he never thought it would come at such a high cost. The injection of Digitalis sent his body into turmoil, leaving him teetering between life and death. As Liz watched the man who had once been her greatest love fight for every breath, a realization struck her with undeniable force: she still loved him. It was a truth she could no longer deny, one that had been buried beneath years of heartache and hesitation. But now, as he lay unconscious, she could no longer suppress the depth of her feelings. During the long days and nights that followed, Liz refused to leave his side. She remained in the hospital room, tirelessly caring for him, as though her presence alone could will him back to life. She held his hand, whispered words of encouragement, and prayed for the moment his eyes would finally open. Each small movement, a flicker of his fingers, the uneven rise and fall of his chest, sent her heart racing with hope and fear. And then, at last, the moment came. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing those familiar eyes, filled with confusion and pain but also something deeper, recognition. Their gazes locked, and in that instant, everything was laid bare. There were no words, no explanations, just a silent understanding that neither of them had ever truly moved on. Lucky's recovery was slow, but Liz remained by his side through every difficult step. She helped him regain his strength, guiding him through the pain and exhaustion, refusing to let him face it alone. But as his body healed, something else began to mend: his heart. Conversations that had once been filled with uncertainty now carried an honesty neither of them had been brave enough to embrace before. Liz no longer hesitated to show how much she cared, and Lucky no longer masked his emotions behind forced distance. They had both endured loss, made mistakes, and lived with regret, but now they had a chance to reclaim what they had thought was lost forever. As days turned into weeks, their bond deepened, strengthened by the trials they had faced together. They laughed more, shared stolen glances, and found comfort in each other's presence. Liz no longer questioned whether she was making the right choice by standing beside him; she knew in her heart that she belonged there. And for Lucky, the realization was just as profound. He had spent years searching for direction, for purpose, but it was in Liz's unwavering presence that he found the home he had been longing for. The love they shared had been tested by time and tragedy, but it had never truly faded. Now, as Lucky took his first unassisted steps toward recovery, Liz was there, her hand reaching for his, steady and certain. This time, there would be no more misunderstandings, no more running from the truth. They had been given a second chance, and neither of them would let it slip away. The past no longer haunted them, and the future, once uncertain, now held the promise of something beautiful. In the quiet moments between them, in the way their hands fit together so effortlessly, it was clear, they had found their way back to each other, and this time, they were never letting go. Second, Ava and Nina had a complicated relationship, one built on mutual favors rather than genuine friendship. They rarely sought each other out unless there was something to gain, and this time, it was Ava's turn to make a request. Desperate to secure financial stability in her custody arrangement with Sonny, she turned to Nina, hoping for assistance with some minor expenses. While Ava was never one to admit vulnerability, she understood that Nina had the means to help, even if their dynamic was anything but warm and trusting. Nina, however, was not particularly eager to involve herself in Ava's affairs, especially when it came to Sonny. She had worked too hard to establish her place in his life, and the last thing she wanted was to entangle herself in another of Ava's schemes. Yet, despite her reluctance, she knew better than to refuse outright. Ava had a way of making herself indispensable, and a well-timed favor could be repaid at a later date. Begrudgingly, she agreed, making it clear that her generosity had limits. Ava, always one to recognize leverage, didn't push her luck. She accepted the help with a well-practiced smile, knowing that Nina's reluctance wouldn't matter as long as she got what she needed. What mattered now was securing her position against Sunny, ensuring that she had the resources necessary to fight for what was hers. And if Nina's discomfort was a price to be paid, then so be it. For Nina, however, this favor was yet another reminder of the tangled web she had woven with the people around her. She had barely managed to keep her footing in Sunny's world, and now, by agreeing to help Ava, she risked complicating things even further. Yet, as she handed over the money, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was not the end of the matter. With Ava, nothing was ever as simple as a favor freely given, it was always the beginning of something more. Third, Carly had finally reached her breaking point, and she was more than ready to confront Drew. His recent actions had caused turmoil within their circle, and she was not about to let it go unchecked. Drew's determination to distance himself from Jason and Sunny in an effort to build a more stable life with Willow had only made matters worse. In his mind, he was doing what was best for his future, for Willow, and for the children, but in reality, he was alienating the very people who had once stood by him. His need to redefine his loyalty had sent shockwaves through their already fragile relationships, and Carly refused to stand by and watch as he unraveled everything. For Carly, the issue was personal on every level. Amelia and Wiley meant the world to her, and the idea of them being raised in a household led by a man she now saw as untrustworthy was unacceptable. Drew's betrayal wasn't just about loyalty to Jason and Sunny, it was about his character, his priorities, and the way he so easily turned his back on those who had supported him. Carly had always been protective, and this situation was no different. She couldn't stomach the thought of her grandchildren growing up under the roof of a man who had chosen to abandon his principles when it suited him. The confrontation between Carly and Drew was inevitable, and when it finally happened, it was explosive. Carly held nothing back, making it clear that she saw him for who he truly was, a man willing to sell out his so-called family for the sake of his own convenience. She accused him of being selfish, of prioritizing his new life over the people who had always had his back. Drew, in turn, tried to defend himself, insisting that his decisions were based on a desire for stability, but Carly wasn't buying it. In her eyes, he had crossed a line, and there was no coming back from it. The argument escalated quickly, emotions running high as Carly made it clear that she would never accept Drew as a suitable parental figure for Amelia and Wiley. The tension between them had been brewing for a while, but now, there was no going back. Carly wasn't just angry, she was done. Any respect she had left for Drew had evaporated, and from that moment forward, she saw him as nothing more than a man who had betrayed those closest to him. The damage was done, and Carly had no intention of backing down. Fourth, Portia had no interest in hearing what Rick had to say. The mere sight of him standing before her was enough to send a wave of unease through her, and she knew instinctively that whatever he had come to discuss would only lead to trouble. Rick had a way of exposing inconvenient truths, and this time, the truth he held over her was something she wished would stay buried forever. Rick had uncovered Drew's knowledge of her past deception, the altered test results regarding Heather. It was a secret that could unravel everything she had built, not only for herself but for Curtis as well. The very idea that Drew, of all people, had this leverage over her was enough to make her stomach churn. Portia had worked too hard to create a stable life, to mend the fractures in her marriage, and to keep the past from tainting her future. But now, with Rick standing there, laying out the cold, hard reality, she realized that her carefully crafted world was in danger of collapsing. Rick, of course, presented himself as the solution to her problem. He had his own motives, and whether it was for personal gain or some twisted sense of justice, Portia wasn't sure. What she did know, however, was that his interference would only make matters worse. She didn't want to hear his proposals, his strategies, or his warnings. The mere suggestion that she might have to negotiate with Drew or, worse, bow to whatever he had planned, was enough to make her blood boil. She refused to believe that her fate was in Drew's hands, and she certainly wasn't about to let Rick dictate how she handled the situation. Annoyed and unsettled, Portia shut down the conversation before Rick could press any further. She was not ready to entertain the possibility that Drew had the power to destroy her life, nor was she willing to accept Rick's so-called solutions. Walking away, she tried to push aside the gnawing fear in her chest, but deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Rick had exposed the cracks in the foundation she had built, and now, she had to find a way to keep everything from crumbling before it was too late. Finally, Alexis had spent a lifetime navigating dangerous situations, but this time, she knew she was in deeper than ever. The moment Sidwell delivered the Cassadine family dagger into her hands, she felt the weight of something far more insidious than just a threat. It wasn't just a message, it was a promise of what was to come. The dagger, a relic of her family's dark and twisted past, was meant to remind her that she could never truly escape that legacy. But Sidwell wasn't just taunting her. He was aligning himself with a force far more unpredictable, Drew. That realization sent a chill down her spine. She had once considered Drew a man of integrity, someone who, despite his struggles, had a sense of morality. But now, that version of Drew no longer existed. He had become consumed by his desire for revenge, his anger twisting him into someone unrecognizable. And with Sidwell by his side, his vendetta had turned into a full-fledged war against those he blamed for his suffering. Alexis wasn't naive, she knew exactly what men like them were capable of when they felt wronged. The lives of those around her, including her own, were now at risk. Knowing she couldn't face this battle alone, Alexis turned to Curtis. He had always been someone she could count on, level-headed, strategic, and unafraid to take action when needed. As she sat across from him, laying out every grim detail, she saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. He understood the stakes. He had seen the shift in Drew's behavior firsthand, and he wasn't about to let that man get away with whatever twisted plan he was orchestrating. But even Curtis hadn't anticipated the depth of Drew's betrayal, nor the extent to which he was willing to go to destroy those who had wronged him. Curtis knew they had to be smart about this. They weren't just dealing with a couple of thugs looking for quick revenge, Sidwell was calculated, and Drew had become just as ruthless. If they made the wrong move, they could end up in far more danger than they already were. They needed leverage, something to dismantle whatever power Drew and Sidwell thought they had over them. Curtis promised Alexis that they wouldn't go down without a fight, that they would strike first before Drew had the chance to tear apart their lives. With a renewed sense of determination, Alexis and Curtis devised a plan. They would gather evidence, expose Drew for what he had become, and find a way to sever his alliance with Sidwell before it was too late. But as they prepared for the battle ahead, Alexis couldn't shake the feeling that they were up against something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. Drew had already proven he was willing to betray those closest to him, and now, he had nothing left to lose. That made him unpredictable. That made him deadly. And Alexis knew that if they didn't stop him now, there was no telling how far he would go.